All right, we just passed the last exit I could take if I wanted to charge this vehicle. There's no going back now. There is a chance that I may not be able to get home with the remaining range I have left. I got 13 miles of range on this vehicle, and well, hopefully we make it home because there's no turning back now. There's no more charging stops. What is up, everybody? Shwazy here, and in today's video, we're doing a little bit of a road trip or a staycation. So we're gonna be testing the real-life range of the RIVIAN R1T. Now, the objective of today's video is to drive from Salt Lake City, Utah, up to a city called Garden City, which for the majority of people is also called Bear Lake. And it's a very popular destination for a lot of people living in Utah. It's a very beautiful lake. It's very blue. It's known to be the Caribbean of the North, whatever title you want to call it. But I used to do this trip in my Ford Bronco very often, and typically I wouldn't worry about refueling because there's a gas station on every corner. But today will be my first time taking the RIVIAN R1T. So we have it fully loaded. There's stuff in the truck bed. The gear tunnel is packed. Frunk is packed. We're doing kind of a little bit of a staycation with the family, and I wanted to see in real life, can you make it to a 2.5 hour away destination and come back without having to charge your vehicle? Now, to give you the specific specs of my particular car, it's a 2023 RIVIAN R1T. I just took delivery of it about a month ago at this point, and on paper, my vehicle has a range of 289 miles. It's the large battery pack, and it's got the 20-inch all-terrain upgrade, so the off-road package, and for that reason, it has a little bit lower range than the larger rim, more conventional tire versions of this particular vehicle. The distance from here to Garden City is 139 miles. So if you do there and back, it's 278 miles round trip. So technically, it should be able to make it there and back without a problem. However, there is one minor hiccup, and that is the fact that I'm going to be staying 2 nights. And typically, overnight, I lose about 2 or 3% just to what they call phantom drain. Now, part of the reason I think that happens here at my house is because my phone is constantly connecting and disconnecting from this vehicle because I'm walking around the house, and depending on how close I am to the vehicle, it will automatically detect that the car is connected. And so I have a feeling that if I'm a little bit further away from this vehicle, I may lose a little bit less percentage. It's a theory, I'm not quite sure, but we'll see if we can test it today because I am going to be parked a little bit further away so that my phone won't constantly be connected to the vehicle. The other thing to mention here is elevation. So right now, here in the Salt Lake Valley, we're about 4,500 feet. I'll show you exactly what it looks like when we jump inside the vehicle. And in terms of temperatures, we're looking at the 80s or low 90s during the day, but at night, it gets in the high 50s, low 60s. It's the end of August right now. Where we're going, which is Garden City, it's a much higher elevation. We'll show you when we get to our destination what it looks like, but the temperatures there are much cooler. So we're talking highs in the low to mid 70s during the day, and the lows are in the high 40s. And as many of you know, your range can get significantly impacted by colder weather. Now, I'm not saying that the high 40s is cold weather, but I do think that I'll have a little bit more phantom drain when we're at the destination because it's going to be colder climates. This vehicle is going to have to work a little bit harder to warm up that battery, keep it at the optimal temperature. Now, the last thing I'll mention here before we jump inside and I'll show you some of the numbers is the fact that I'm going to do my best to not charge this vehicle at my destination. Now, realistically, if I was doing this trip with just the family and not filming a video, not trying to provide you guys some information, I would probably just plug this vehicle into a regular 110 volt outlet. So just your typical household outlet, I would plug it in, leave it, 2 days, 2 nights, and it would probably get like 20-30% over that time period, in which case I most certainly would not have to stop at a fast charger or anywhere else. I could simply just trickle charge it at home. However, realistically speaking, if you guys are making the same type of trip, which a lot of people do, they do a lot of like weekend trips, leave on a Friday evening, come back on a Sunday evening. When you get to your destination, unless you're staying in an Airbnb, you're probably not going to be able to just to plug into, a hotel or anything like that. You're going to be sitting in a parking lot. So I want to try to create this as realistically as possible. And because of that, I'm also not going to be very light on the pedal. I'm also going to crank up the AC because it gets pretty hot during the day. I'm going to turn on the ventilated seats, right? I'm going to do it as comfortably as possible and as realistically as possible because we're not trying to beat any records here. We're just trying to see, can you get to your destination that's about 150 miles away and still be able to come back and also test how realistic the numbers are on the computer and whether Rivian is right with its 289-mile range that they quoted for this particular R1T. So let's jump inside and let's show you what the computer is showing me in terms of total range and what range I'll arrive when we get there. Okay, we've jumped into the vehicle, and it's funny, the range continues to change, but here we are at 100%, and it looks like I have 313 miles of range. So this is where it gets interesting, because even though on paper my vehicle is only 289 miles, I put this vehicle in conserve mode, which I don't think is out of the norm for anybody to do. Conserve mode essentially turns this thing into a dual motor setup. So it only sends power to the front two wheels. The rear wheels are deactivated, so your quad motor essentially becomes a dual motor. It does a couple more things like it'll lower the ride height and other things like that, but for the most part, that's the main amount of savings that you're going to get. I don't see why you wouldn't need to put it in conserve mode if you're planning on going on a road trip, similar to how you put it in eco mode in a gas engine when you're taking a road trip. So in conserve mode, it's saying 313 miles, and this is based on my previous driving history. So even though on paper this battery can only do 289 by the EPA, since I've been driving somewhat more efficiently with just taking regular trips around the city, it's estimating that I have 313 miles of juice inside of the battery. Now, the other settings here are the max charging. That's how I set it last night to be able to get to 100%. And then as you can see, my power outlets are turned off because, well, I don't need any power outlets on inside the vehicle. And then plugging in the destination, Garden City, it says I am going to arrive with 154 miles of juice still left in the battery, and it's about a 2.5 hour drive, which is what I'm expecting. Now, even though it says 2.5 hours, I'm realistically going to take a little bit longer because I'm planning on making a couple stops along the way. I think that's perfectly normal for a lot of people that have a family. You're going to stop for a bathroom break, a snack break, etc. And so I don't expect I'm going to lose much range during those stopping periods. That's why I'm not really worried about it. Maybe 1 or 2% max over the course of the entire trip. But then on the way back, I'm actually going to try to straight shoot it, unless of course I have to stop to charge the vehicle. So without further ado, let's get the show on the road. Here at our first stop, which is just a Starbucks located over here inside of the Smith's grocery store. We've driven just a little bit over an hour, about an hour and 15 minutes or so. I looked at Google Maps to see how far we've driven, and it's about 77 miles. And then when I take a look at the energy screen here, so it says that we're at 239 miles. Also, you got to excuse the panting. We've got this little cute doggo, but she hates cars. She has a lot of anxiety, and so she always pants when she's in the car. She's perfectly fine, but she does make a little bit of noise, so I apologize for that ahead of time. But it says that we have 239 miles of range left on the battery. We're exactly 75%. And when you do the math between the 239 miles versus the 313 that I started with, well, that's only a difference of 74 miles. So essentially, we've only used 74 miles of range, but we've traveled 77 miles. So the calculator or the car has been telling me the appropriate information, a little bit more on the conservative side in terms of range. Also, when you take a look at the navigation screen, you can see here that we have 166 miles of range at arrival, which is actually going to be a little bit more than they initially stated. So far, so good. Let's hit the road again and see how much farther we can go. All right, folks, so we arrived at our destination. So the halfway point of this trip is pretty much over for the Rivian. And I gotta say, there's two takeaways. The first takeaway is in terms of the actual range. So right now, it says that I'm at 160 miles of range. Now, I will say that when I arrived at this destination, it was 162 miles. It's gone down about 2% as I was loading, unloading the vehicle. The AC was still running, so that's my fault. But 2 miles went down. What's interesting is, The last leg of the trip is, if you guys are familiar with the area, it's about a 45-minute canyon ride, and it's pretty much uphill the entire time. In fact, as I'm sure you saw in some of the B-roll footage, we hit a max height of like 7,800 feet above sea level, whereas we started around 4,500. So you definitely climb a lot. And I will say, as soon as I entered this canyon for the last 45-minute run, the GPS told me that at the end of this trip, I would be at 162 miles of range. And it matched it exactly. It couldn't have predicted it any better. And that's considering accelerating, decelerating, passing some people, temperature conditions. It just did flawless. In fact, partway through the canyon, we actually hit a low of, I think, 158 or 57 miles of range on my instrument gauge cluster, but it was still showing me 162 miles at arrival. And that's because after you hit the peak of the mountain, you start heading downhill, and so that's where you get a lot of juice from that regen braking back into the battery. And so it predicted it perfectly. Now, if you compare this to when I took off earlier today from my house, it was showing 154 miles at arrival. So it was actually a little bit more conservative than at the arrival point. That's exactly what you want. You don't want it to be less conservative where you can't show up to your destination. I prefer it to be a little bit more conservative and then be better than what it predicted. And honestly, that's the same impression I got when I drove this vehicle back from Colorado when I took delivery of it. I wasn't really tracking the range much. I was just trying to enjoy the experience, but I was noticing that the range it was showing me on the screen was actually a little bit worse than in real life, the range I was getting. And I never felt like I was, running out of energy. I'd always get to a charging stop with more than it even predicted that my vehicle would have. So I'm curious now, if I plug in my home destination, if I was to just turn around right now and head home, what would be my overall range? One thing to point out about this GPS system that's frustrating me a little bit is there's two routes to get to this destination from my house. One of them is a little bit longer by just like 5 or 6 miles or so, and a little bit less scenic. So typically I take the shorter route because it's a little bit quicker and it's a little bit prettier because you're driving through a canyon. However, the GPS system here, for whatever reason, continues to show me the route using the longer road than the shorter one, even though the shorter one is the one I took to get here. So I'm not quite sure why it does that. In fact, when I'm selecting the other one, because it shows me both options, when I select the other one, as soon as I hit go, and then remove charging stops, it still defaults to the other one. And I have a feeling it does that because there's more charging stops along the way in the other route. But since I'm not using charging stops, I would just like to know what the range could be if I got to my destination using the other route. Now, the other thing here is it could be that my range is not sufficient enough to get to my destination using the first route without charging. That's another possibility. So we may just have to wing it, which isn't something I like doing. In 2 days, when I get into this vehicle, I'm going to just drive down the same route that I took, and hopefully I will regen enough energy back into the battery as I'm driving down the canyon. And considering I have 160 miles of range left in the battery, and it's only a 143 or so mile trip, I think I should be okay, even considering the fact that I am going to have a little bit of phantom drain over the next night or two. But let's see what happens in 2 days when I wake up and get into this vehicle. Is it going to be 140 miles? Because then I might be pushing it a little bit, and I may have to make a charging stop for just maybe 10-15 minutes. Once again, it's 160 miles. I'm exactly at 50%. So let's see if I can make it back without charging. All right, folks, so it has been 2 days, and we're about to embark on the last leg of the trip heading back home. Now, a couple things I want to point out. First off, I'm sitting at about 136 miles, 42% range. Now, that hasn't just been this car sitting here. Full disclosure, I drove this car about 12 miles while I was in the city. I drove it to get dinner, breakfast, grocery store. Not ideal, but realistically, if you're going to have this car, you're probably going to do the same thing, right? You get to your destination, you drive around a little bit. So I didn't plug this in at all overnight, even though I had the urge to do so because of my anxiety. I still didn't do it for the sake of this video. I'm still currently in conserve mode. I'm in the lowest suspension setting. I feel like it's going to be a little bit more aerodynamic, and 136 miles is not enough to get home. It's about 140 miles to get home. So definitely a little bit of a white knuckle trip for me, but I wanted to do it for the sake of this video. Now, for the majority of the trip, I'm going downhill. So I'm hoping that the regen braking will be enough to rely very little on the battery pack itself. We'll see what happens. It's going to be a very close trip. We'll see if we can make it. I'm going to play it by ear, but if I get to, within 20 miles of my house and it's only showing, 10 miles of range, I'm probably going to stop for like 5-10 minutes at a charging station. So let's kick things off. I'm actually going to turn off the climate for the passenger and the rear seats because there's actually nobody sitting there, so there's no reason for it to just be running. If it gets hot, obviously I'll turn it back on, but there's really no need for me to do that. I'm just going to have the airflow on me, and we'll see how it goes. Let's kick off this journey. Let's hope we make it home without having to stop for a charge. All right, so I was finally able to get the route to update to the one I'm actually taking, and it gave me a little warning saying I'm not going to make it. It's got a little battery with an exclamation point on it, just letting me know that there's not enough range. So this is a little bit scary, but we'll see what happens. Again, I'm really hoping on that downhill, I'm going to regen a lot of energy back into the battery. But honestly, the vehicle was mostly correct on the way here, but it actually was a little bit more conservative. So I'm hoping it's, again, being a little bit more conservative, and maybe I'll arrive at home with 2, 3, 4 miles of range left. Let's see what happens. All right, folks, we're going to do a little bit of a test here within this video. So right now, I am sitting at 113 miles of range at the top of this mountain. It's about 7,800 feet above sea level, and the rest of this canyon ride is going to be downhill. So I want to see how much range can I regain, or at least how little range I'll use up driving down this mountain. So 112 miles of range, and the test begins now. All right, we're about at the halfway point down the canyon, and I have 109 miles of range on the dash. So I've only used 2 miles, and I've probably traveled about 20 miles. So we've regained a lot of energy just going down this hill. So let's see how it is at the very end. Okay, so we are now down at an elevation of 4,700 feet above sea level. We are at a range of 105 miles, which means we only used about 6 miles of range to go a distance of about 30 miles. So the other thing is we've essentially caught up in terms of distance to our destination and range on the vehicle. So we have about 103 or so miles to go, and we have 105 miles of range. Now, I don't think that's going to last because we're going to be changing elevation here again, but hey, at least we're caught up now and we're not under the amount of range I have in the vehicle. So let's keep this trip going. Let's see if we can make it. Okay, so we're at the first stoplight. Just wanted to give you an update. 103 miles of range, and we have about 100 miles remaining to get home. So it's definitely cutting it close. We're going to be driving at freeway speed, so it's going to be a little bit tougher. It's probably going to eat away at this range a little bit quicker. So I have a feeling we're going to have to stop for charging, but let's see what happens. Here we go. All right, folks, we are on the last leg of our trip. We've got about 71 miles to go and 75 miles of range on the gauge cluster. So it's definitely cutting it close. I'm worried because the next leg of the trip, or the last leg, is freeway speeds. And usually on freeway speeds, you're going to be losing a little bit quicker range. So I'm going to be evaluating this in real time to see what my range looks like when I'm within 25 miles or so of getting home. So we're going to drive as efficiently as we can, but in terms of speed, we're just going with the flow of traffic, right? I'm not going below speed limit to save on any range. I want to get there the same amount of time as I would with the gas car. So let's see what happens. We're going to keep driving, and this is the moment of truth right now. All right, folks, I'm getting a little bit worried here. We got 46 miles to go, and I've only got 48 miles of range left. So I might have to stop. The vehicle is still telling me I am not going to make it to my destination. I was getting a little hopeful there because I had about a 4 or 5 mile range lead, but that's kind of gone down as I've been going up hills. So hopefully we'll be able to regain it going down hills here maybe in a little bit, but it's not looking promising, so I might have to stop. I'll keep you in the loop. All right, folks, exciting update. So the vehicle now, instead of just showing an exclamation point with the battery around it, it has the exclamation point with the battery, but it says I'll have 1 mile of range. That's an improvement from what it was showing before. So at least there's more than just one person thinking we'll make it on time. The vehicle is now thinking maybe we'll be able to make it with 1 mile left. Once we pass a certain point, there's not going to be any more charging stations left. So either I have to stop at the last charging station, or I just got to commit and make it home. The only problem is the very last leg of the trip is an uphill climb, and I'm worried that is where I'm going to lose majority of the range. So we'll see what happens. 1 mile is hopeful. Let's see if we can get it to 2. 2 would give me just enough of a buffer to feel a little bit more comfortable. All right, folks, so we just hit 29, 30 miles of range, and now my battery indicator went from yellow to red. So it's real time right now. We got 23 miles to our destination. Terrific news, everybody. My Range estimate has just gone up to 2 miles, and no longer do I have the exclamation point on the screen. So this is amazing news. It's thinking we can make it there. So we've got 27 miles of range left, and we got 20 miles left to our destination. So this is scary, but I'm feeling a little bit more confident. If all things stay the same, I'm not planning on stopping to charge at a public charger. I am hopefully going to make it home. So this is really good news. Let's see if we can bump it up to 3 miles now. That would give me just enough of a buffer. Now, based on the range estimates, I have 7 miles, but again, that uphill is where I'm probably gonna lose a little bit of range. This is the moment of truth, everybody. So we're about to pass the last exit that I could take if I was to stop and charge this vehicle, but we're not gonna do it. We've got, according to the vehicle, 4 miles of range left upon arrival at my destination. So it's gone up from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. Now we're at 4. I've got 14 miles of range in the vehicle and 7 miles to go. So I think we're gonna make it. I think we're safe. You never know until you get there. First stoplight off the freeway, and we have 11 miles of range, 3 miles to go. Vehicle says we'll arrive with a destination mileage of 6 miles. It's about 2%. That's actually fantastic. We'll see if this is realistic. It's continued to adjust upwards, but now we're hitting some stoplights. We're gonna go uphill. So it's questionable if that ending range is accurate. And just as I finished recording that clip, now the vehicle's telling me we're gonna arrive with 4 miles of range left. So it dropped 2 miles. That's a little scary. Hopefully it doesn't do that again. We're coming up to that large hill. It's all uphill now until we get home. We've got 8 miles of range, 1.7 miles until the destination. Vehicle still says 4 miles of range at destination. So hopefully this is true. I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable, more confident, but well, we'll see what happens after we finish this incline. We are almost home. Oh, can we make it? Let's hope. Let's hope. We got one more light. We made it. We made it. 5 miles of range left on the battery. Let me show you the charging screen here. So it shows 5 miles, 2%. We're gonna jump out of the car and quickly plug this in. I don't want this thing to die. Right as I pulled into my driveway, it said that mileage range is really low, performance is going to be reduced. But obviously I was going like 5 miles an hour, so it didn't matter for me. But let's plug this in, then let's recap this video. Whew! All right. We made it. It also didn't help that I really needed to use the restroom, so that added to the anxiety. Okay, so we got the car plugged in. It's exactly 2%. We're going to charge up to 70%, which is what I use on a daily basis. It says it's going to take about 14 or so hours to do so. So I wanted to kind of do an overview and recap of everything that happened and my takeaways from this experience. So first off, I'm very impressed. I didn't think I was going to make it, especially after driving about 12 miles in the city that we were staying at. I thought I used too much range at that point. I wasn't going to make it home, but I still wanted to try, and obviously it worked. The first thing I want to mention is my vehicle didn't have the tonneau cover closed because I don't have one yet. The tonneau cover is still in production process, and I was told that I would get it before the end of the year, but that helps improve your range. If you close your tonneau cover, that's definitely going to be an add-on to the range figures that I have experienced. Second thing to mention is in terms of speed and climate. Now, I was going at speed limit, sometimes below if the traffic was kind of tight, and sometimes a little bit above speed limit to pass people on the highway. So I wasn't trying to go as slow as possible. It took me about 2.5 hours, which is about average is what it takes on a gas car. In terms of the speed, I was mostly relying on cruise control. I figured it would do the best job in terms of downhill, regen braking, accelerating uphill. So 95% of the time I had cruise control on, and I think it did a good job. I think it helped me get to my destination with enough range. Similar to a gas car, I think cruise control makes a significant difference in terms of MPG and range. Another interesting thing that I was surprised to see was the fact that at highway speeds, I wasn't losing that much more range. I expected that above 70 miles per hour, in fact, above 60 miles per hour, I would be going 1 mile of distance, but losing 2 miles of range in the vehicle. That's kind of the impression I had about electric vehicles. They perform much better on city traffic than they do on the highway. And I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't experience that at all. In fact, it was pretty much 1 for 1. I was, traveling 1 mile on the freeway, and I was losing about 1 mile of range on the instrument gauge cluster. At times it was a little bit more because I was going uphill, and then I would start regaining it when I was going downhill. And as you saw, when we started the freeway trip, it told me I would have about 3 or 4 miles of range left. And at the end of the trip, I had about 5 miles. So it was pretty accurate the entire time. And I didn't really lose much more range driving 70 plus miles per hour. Here in Utah, we have some sections of the highway are 75 miles per hour. And I went 75 miles per hour. So even going above 70 didn't impact my range adversely as I expected it to. Now, in regards to the total range that I traveled over the last 2 days, I did the math here. So it was about 139 one way, 140 another way. I drove 12 miles. So I did 291 miles of range, which is impressive considering the vehicle on paper has 289 miles. So I did exactly what the EPA figures estimate. However, I also had it sit there for about 2 days with that overnight drain that every single electric vehicle has. They call it the phantom drain. I did the calculation. It looks like I lost approximately 7 miles of range every single day after I deducted the 12 miles of driving in the city. Now, if you convert that to percentages, assuming I get about 300 miles of range, then that's about 2.5%, a little bit less than 2.5. That's actually pretty good. It's pretty standard, I think, amongst other vehicles. I have heard the Rivian has a little bit worse phantom drain than some other electric vehicles, but I think it's overall okay. And I do know that Rivian has made updates to the system where it's been a little bit more efficient over time. So 2 years ago, the phantom drain was much worse than it is today. And I think the quad motor is a little bit worse at that than maybe the dual motor and some other configurations. But it is what it is. I mean, 2.5% per day isn't terrible. It could be a little bit better, but it's not bad. So if I had just done the trip straight there and straight back, I probably could have had an additional maybe 14, 15 miles of range. If you add that on top of the 5 that I had when I got here, that's 20 miles of range. I could easily get over 300 miles of range in these same conditions, considering, 80-degree temperatures, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, uphill, downhill. I mean, this wasn't flat terrain the entire way. This was kind of all over the place. So that is another thing that I wanted to mention. This isn't perfect EPA conditions. This was how you would normally drive a vehicle at pretty high elevations. And that's what's even more impressive about the figures that I was able to achieve. The other thing to mention here is the car's estimated range per the GPS screen is very accurate. It's not 100% accurate because it told me initially I wasn't going to be able to make it to my destination when in fact I was able to. But just so you know, it's a little bit on the more conservative side. If you drive, more efficiently, if you're not constantly hammering on the gas pedal, and you wouldn't if you have cruise control on, then that means that the range is pretty realistic to what the car is telling you you're going to get. And that makes me feel a little bit better about taking some longer road trips. And in fact, the reason I did this video was not only for you, but also for me to figure out what distance can this car actually get. And from what I'm seeing, it's very, very close to the EPA estimates of 290 or so miles of range, which is pretty decent for my usage. Now, the last takeaway is kind of what I started off with, is the fact that I'm impressed with these figures. I was expecting it to be much less a range than the 289 that EPA was showing, because usually that's a much higher figure than real numbers. And no, this was realistic. This is a pickup truck. I was going 75 miles on the freeway. Climate control was on. Occasionally I would turn it off because I didn't need it. It wasn't really that hot in the vehicle, so I would shut it off, turn it back on. But I was able to get 291 miles of range, and it was plenty of range to go on a little weekend trip 2.5 hours away, there and back without having to charge. That I would call a success. And in all honesty, this was better than my gas car. In my Bronco, I would typically get in and drive to that same exact destination, and unless I was under half a tank of gas, I wouldn't stop on the way there to fill up the car. I would just get there, and then on the way home, I would typically stop by the gas station, fill up for 5-10 minutes, and drive back home. Whereas the convenience of having an electric vehicle with the refueling station being at home is I had it with 100% charge when I left, and I was able to get there and back without having to charge. So I honestly saved a little bit more time without having to stop for any refueling because I was at 100% when I left for my trip. I'm not comparing it because it's apples to oranges, but I was very impressed with my overall trip, and I would definitely recommend road tripping in your Rivian R1T, trusting the calculator, trusting the EPA range, because it looks to be pretty realistic considering the change in climate, change in elevation. Everything was accurate. So what are your thoughts on today's video? Did you enjoy this? A little bit of white knuckle experience at some point, a little bit of high anxiety on my end, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I was able to get to my destination without having to charge. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button, and also subscribe to the channel for all of the weekly car videos, everything from range tests to car reviews to other videos on the vehicles I own, including the Hellcat. Also check me out on all the social media at Shwazy_. Until next time, everybody, I hope you stay Shwazy, stay healthy, have a wonderful day.